everything.
Right.
So.
And how's everything going? How are you feeling?
Good. I'm not freaking out yet. I mean, everything that we're being told and whatnot is scary, but it's we're taking the precautions to keep it under control.
Right.
For now. So.
Well, that's good, and thank you for doing the work.
Oh, of course.
Let me just copy a few things to get set up on the YouTube side for people who are coming through that portal. Remind people that tonight is Q&A. Pop out the YouTube chat, so I've got that to look at as well. Rearrange all the screens because that's how this works. So look, I came back and there are more people there. Hey guys. Feel free to unmute. This is a Q&A time. Like I mentioned last week, this evening is really all going to be about what you guys want to know. So I've been talking for, about 15 weeks straight, which is long even for me. And I want to make sure that you all have a chance to ask questions and not only hear what I wanted to talk about.
But
so you're welcome to go ahead and jump on in with a question. If we start getting too much crosstalk, I can always switch it over to mute and make people raise hands, but I don't think we're going to need that. Everyone's too polite to go first. Wow, I've explained everything perfectly in the last 14 weeks. No one has any questions left. If only. Well, while you guys are still thinking, let me ask you a question. That's what happens when people don't come up with their own questions, is I start asking you. So what are you guys doing to get ready for Passover during this rather unusual time?
So we actually, my fiance and I actually went to Winn-Dixie last Sunday, and we got our matzah and started preparing for that. So that was, they had everything. We went to the one that you suggested.
Right, the Fern Park one off 1792. Right.
Yeah, and I was surprised at the availability of everything.
Yeah, that Winn-Dixie always has a really good stock. This year, there was a little nervous that they might have been undersupplied, but so far it looks like they're holding up pretty well. I guess not too many people are realizing that the matzah supply is a really good thing to have in an emergency.
Yes.
That's what we took when we left Egypt, and there was a reason for that.
But yeah, it was fun shopping for it too. It was the first time I've ever done that, so it was just fun shopping for it as well. Yeah,
and over the years, you'll find that you settle into an understanding of exactly what you need and what you don't need for Passover. I still remember the first year I was, an adult and doing Passover on my own. I really forgot that it's just a week plus 1 day, that you don't actually have to buy, 1,000 bags of egg noodles to make it through. It's you can get by with a pretty decent minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also learned I really don't like egg noodles.
There's a good deli around the corner that does Uber Eats, so that counts.
I mean, using Uber Eats. I don't know whether does Uber Eats deliver matzah?
This one actually has really good matzo ball soup, so the very Jewish deli, but it's right around the corner and very convenient. So
Although I would point out that it's more than likely that that's a Jewish style deli, or kosher style. You'll often hear it called. It uses recipes that are Jewish recipes, but it doesn't actually follow Jewish procedure, kosher procedure for food preparation.
Good call.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than going into a deli and seeing that they're serving ham. It's like, well, wait a minute.
Actually, I did see they had pork belly on the menu today, and I thought that was a little weird.
Yeah, that's welcome to kosher style, which means they've got all the flavor and none of the kosher of actual Jewish cooking.
Really good Reubens, though.
No, I mean the basic recipes are wonderful recipes. There's a reason why when we left Eastern Europe, we brought a lot of those meats and flavors with us, and left a lot of the rest of Eastern Europe behind. We've learned to take tasty food from around the world and make it our own.
Yeah, so I came to New Orleans with my fiance once this all kind of kicked off, and this was kind of post everyone raiding all the grocery stores and everything. So our cupboards are pretty barren at the moment.
Gotcha. Well, definitely, like I said, stock up on some matzah. It's one of the only two foods you need for the mitzvah of Passover, the other one being the bitter herbs. And the bitter herbs are easier to find usually. You can just, raid the salad section of the supermarket. But yeah, you don't need a lot to get through Passover. Your basic fruits, vegetables, fish, meat, that kind of stuff will do just fine. It's just stay away from the processed stuff, and Passover is not too complicated.
Okay. Not horseradish. I remember that much.
Yeah, horseradish, like I said last week, while now a flavor of Passover and something that I have at my house, doesn't actually qualify for the bitter herbs, for the maror, during the mitzvah. So I save my horseradish to go with either the beef or to go with the gefilte fish.
Okay.
I think Eliana's gonna be making matzo ball soup, and she has some matzo ears, and you're gonna do an online seder, right? Yeah, so with her family. So
Link in with the family, yeah. That's
yeah.
It's very hard this year. Passover is it's hard to really compare, but it's almost like Thanksgiving, plus the major religious holiday. So it's both family together with the religion, together with the history and culture and all of that. And one of the major parts of both our history, our culture, and our religion is to be together with a large group of people for this holiday in particular. So it is going to feel really, really weird to have Passover where it's just either a few people in a house, or in some cases just one or two people in a house.
Yeah, I think we were planning on doing a Zoom Seder with her family.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be becoming a very popular option.
Yeah, we're gonna FaceTime in with my fiance's as well. So.
Gotcha. Just real quick, there was a question from John on the YouTube where he wanted to know if he can use mustard greens or collard greens for from his garden for the bitter herbs. And I have to say, I don't know what those taste like. But if they're bitter, they're fine.
They're bitter.
So, especially
Rabbi,
yes?
do I ask myself the 4 questions and then answer them?
Well, actually, yes. The 4 questions are really just meant to be the kickstart to the Seder. So yes, a person will ask themselves the question. So as I kind of pointed out, technically they aren't 4 questions, it's 1 question. Why is this different? And then 4 examples of what the differences are. But it is a really good way to begin to wake up the question and answer in a person. And you can keep answering your own questions, because sometimes we've got answers if we just bother to sit and think about a question for a while. A lot of times people don't realize how much they know or how much they understand until they ask themselves a question. So maybe I'll have to try the mustard greens or collard greens this year, or maybe next year when it's a little easier to get them.
Yeah.
I try out the different greens when I go to, the grocery store to see what's bitterest in a particular year.
The mustard greens will give you a run for your money. Definitely.
Good to know. Good to know. Yeah, the horseradish thing really came about because in Eastern Europe, especially in Northeastern Europe, come Passover, things weren't necessarily growing back all that fast. And so that meant that a lot of people were not finding anything that was suitable for the maror, for the bitter herbs. Whereas horseradish, because it's a root and growing underground, was apparently a little bit easier to find, a little bit easier to source. And so it became sort of practice to use the horseradish instead of. But anybody who's ever eaten a good bitter herb compared to a good horseradish, those are two very different taste sensations. Horseradish is very sharp. It is very painful almost. Bitterness is not painful. The pain of slavery we could endure. It was the bitterness of slavery that was the biggest problem. Any other questions? This is your time, guys. And trust me, if you have a question, chances are so does someone else.
So I had a question about last week's, what is it? I don't want to say tutorial, but last week's session, we were talking about how the crumbs, they have to be like a certain size, and you had mentioned that what was it, unfit for a dog to eat was like the standard. Like, what's that from? I mean, is that standardized somewhere, or?
Absolutely. Yep. So that's standardized in Jewish law for about the last 2,000 years that we at least have a clear record of. Both the standard measurement, which is kazait, like an olive, was based on the debate of the sages of what counts as being a minimum measure of food. Less than is considered insignificant, which is a very important concept. Once you begin to really take the notion of law seriously, you need to have certain minimums and maximums for most rulings. Otherwise, what spec of food would still be considered important? Would you need to go around your floor with a magnifying glass and tweezers, trying to make sure that you had gotten every single thing? And so the olive standard is standard not only for this, but for many, many other things as well. So for example, if you eat an olive-sized piece of bread, then you're also obligated to do the blessing after eating bread. With regards to the dog eating, that has to do with the fact that we're not allowed to derive benefit from chametz. And the question then becomes, well, what counts as benefit? I mean, if some random animal is going to eat it, am I benefiting from it? And they say, well, no, you never can account for what a duck's going to eat, but a dog has at least some standard. A dog will turn up his nose at things. A dog can sort of pick and choose, and the dog is less choosy than a human being, but the dog will still eat, will still avoid eating certain things. And so not fit for a dog really did become sort of the standard of food in general in Jewish law.
Okay. Yeah, it's like I don't think my dog would eat bitter herbs, but other than that, I'm very picky.
Well, depending upon where you live, a lot of dogs today get to be pickier than dogs used to be. A lot of dogs today are quite spoiled. But
I don't know if you can see on the couch there.
When I was growing up, our dogs got table scraps and they were happy for it. But there were even some things that they wouldn't eat.
Gotcha, that makes sense.
Be fun to come back to the bowl and see what they had eaten around and left. More questions? Bueller?
Notice they didn't use a cat.
Now, if it said not fit for a cat, then a cat is the king of being finicky. Plus, cats were generally not kept as pets back in the ancient world, especially in Israel. Cats were considered too close to the idolatry of Egypt.
That makes sense.
Whereas dogs actually get singled out for thanks. They didn't bark at us when we left Egypt. And as a reward, they get to eat some of the meat that we can't eat. For example, if there's an animal that's killed by a wild beast, it's not fit for human consumption. It's not kosher for us, but it is something that our dogs can eat. So they get that as a reward for being nice to us.
Where does it say that the dogs didn't bark?
In the book of Exodus.
Really?
I can go back and double check the verse, but if you give me a second. Hold on a second. It's the joy of the internet. But so annoying. People who don't, or people who do the commentaries, but they don't bother putting in the actual citation.
Right.
Very
Well, I'll look at it later.
Hold on. Cannot allow a mystery to go unsolved. And thankfully, there we go. Okay, so Exodus 11, verse 7 says that it's the preamble to the slaying of the firstborn, and it says that not a dog shall snarl at any of the Israelites, at man or beast, in order that you may know the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel.
So that's what they got it. Okay.
Gate for the dogs. As we say, dogs are man's best friend. Other questions?
The 4 questions.
I like your.
Oh, sorry, the 4 questions, Robertson?
Yeah, the questions. If you're by yourself, do you ask yourself the questions out loud, or do you just say it in your head?
So in general, for any part of Jewish life, we try to do things out loud. We do things out loud for 2 reasons. One is because it simply helps us remember things better. That's just a psychological fact. And 2, because when we say it out loud, there is also then an opportunity for a conversation, if you will. Oftentimes when we say things out loud, we hear them from a very different perspective than when it's just bouncing around in our head. You may have had that experience yourself. You know, if you try out certain things like, okay, I'm going to live in Orlando. I'm going to live in Orlando. Do I want to be able to say I live in Orlando? How does that actually sound to me? It's different than when it's just sort of rolling around in your head. So whether it be the service, whether it be the Haggadah, whether it be studying, letting the words actually come out of your mouth makes a big difference in how we experience them. So yeah, if you're doing the Haggadah by yourself, then you should definitely do it out loud. Don't just sit there and read quietly. And if you've got more than one person, then it makes it a little bit easier, of course, to have a more natural type conversation. But,
Sure.
But even by yourself, and I've been there, when I was in Japan for my first year and did my own solo Seder, doing it out loud was a big part of making it feel more like a Seder and less like reading a book.
All right.
The floor is open.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Just a bit. It's a little quiet.
Okay. So actually, I wrote down like a few questions, and this one isn't really pertaining to Pesach. This has more to do with like whether or not like this is anti-Semitism, but so to provide some context, I once went on a date with like this Christian guy, and he said that the reason why we experienced the Holocaust was because we didn't have enough faith in God. And I was shocked at him. And I said, would you really tell that to someone to their face? Because honestly, it's like, it came off as very abrasive. And like, he acted like, oh, I know the answer and everything. So I just wanted to know if that was like a form of theological anti-Semitism.
I wouldn't exactly say that it was a form of theological anti-Semitism. I would say that it is entirely inappropriate. But
Right.
unfortunately, there are Jewish people who have said similar things. There's actually a very interesting discussion in Bava Metzia in the Talmud about how to talk to a person who has suffered. And the reference that's given there is the sort of technical phrase is you can't be like the friends of Job. If you've never read the book of Job, I highly recommend it. It is a difficult read. The poetry is hard, as is the theology. But in the book of Job, Job is considered a righteous person, and he ends up suffering greatly. And his friends show up and they say, well, it feels, it's too bad, sorry for you, but only sinners suffer. So therefore, you must have done something wrong. And really the next like 30 chapters of the book are his friends arguing with him that he must have deserved this because God is always fair. And the only way a person can suffer is if they've earned the suffering. So he really should just figure out what he did that made God angry, and that will explain it. Now, we, the reader, and Job himself, we know that he did nothing to do this. That's the whole setup in the first couple chapters. And so we know that these friends are fake. And indeed, when God shows up, he tells the friends that they can't hold a candle to Job. And even though they're defending God, they are in fact behaving extremely offensively on God's behalf. So when people try to give their explanation for the Holocaust in any way, shape, or form that makes it seem like those who were victims somehow deserved it, whether it be a sociological argument, whether it be a historical argument, or whether it be a theological argument, really they are committing a very grave transgression against the memory of the victims and the memory of the victims of any tragedy that happens not because of the victim's fault, but because of the horrible choices made by those who are acting in these ways of evil. Now, it is definitely easier for non-Jews to make that kind of argument because non-Jews feel sometimes a little more distant from the event. But I would hope that they would recognize that if it were their family or their community that had suffered like that, they too would probably not want to be told that they had somehow earned it because of lack of faith in God. Now, there is a deeper, and he may have been tapping into this long history of anti-Semitism within Christianity with the idea begun by Augustine, the Saint Augustine, as he's called in Christianity, with the idea that the Jews were meant to be kept alive and were meant to be kept alive in a state of suffering so that the Christians could point to us when they were trying to convert people to Christianity and say, look what happens if you reject Jesus. You end up like the Jews. And Augustine said that you weren't allowed to get rid of the Jews. You just had to make sure that they were not doing well in order to have this, this example effect within the community. So he may have also been tapping into that. And yes, that is definitely considered to be an anti-Semitic, and indeed what it's generally called is supersessionist, the idea that Christianity took over from Judaism. They became the new chosen people. They became God's favorite. They became God's children. And the Jews have been cast to the side only as a useful example of what not to do.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And I hope that date wasn't worse than just that one conversation.
Oh, I dumped him.
Yeah, pretty much someone who lacks sympathy for something like that. It's probably not someone you want to be in a long-term relationship.
Exactly.
It almost sounds like the inverse of that whole like prosperity gospel where, you know, if you do great things, you're going to be rich. And if you don't do good things, you're going to be poor. So poor people deserve it.
It is exactly. And in fact, prosperity theology is built around that very notion. It's a very good connection that you're making there. The idea behind prosperity theology, is everyone familiar with the idea of prosperity theology? Have you heard that before?
Yes.
It's unfortunately become very common in the U.S. Quite recently, but it's not new here. But the idea is, if you are righteous, you will be rich, and therefore, if you are rich, you must be righteous, right? Because God favors those that deserve it. If you have favor, you must deserve it. It's trying to read the circle of causation in both directions. And they get this from a very superficial reading of the Bible, of the Tanakh, where it says that if you follow God's rules, God will make it rain, God will, bring a blessing to your land, et cetera, et cetera. And if you break them, there won't be the rain at the right time, there will be curses in the land. There are a number of problems with the way they apply it, both to justify their own well-being as well as to justify the suffering of the poor. One, of course, is that God continually tells us that we have to help those in need. Well, if those in need are only in need because God is punishing them for their evil, then why in the world would God tell us to help them? I mean, that'd be like saying, this is a person who is guilty of murder, about to be executed, and I'm going to gallop up on a horse and rescue them? No, if they've actually committed the crime and they are actually guilty and should be punished this way, who am I to pervert justice? Well, if God truly was punishing the poor, then why would God tell me to pervert God's justice by saving them from their suffering? So they clearly misunderstand even the most basic biblical analysis. But there's a deeper theological problem that is not only found within this prosperity theology, but is found even in a mild form in many people, which is to feel that somehow the rewards and blessings that an individual experiences is what God is talking about in those other passages. What God is really talking about in those material type passages is about a blessing to a society that comes when the society is a good society. And that is something that we can see and follow in a regular fashion. And likewise, a society that is corrupt will eventually tear itself apart. Who benefits and who gain and who loses in those societies is not always directly correlated one-to-one by who is most righteous and who is least righteous. Because within a community, there is always some level of chaos, some level of mixture of who is benefiting and who is losing. And it does not usually correspond necessarily to who is most deserving. So when we look out at society, our tradition tells us very, very sharply that we are not to judge people, neither as being worthy of the blessings they have, nor of being worthy of the suffering that they are enduring, but instead to make sure that we are helping everybody in need and that we are respectful of everyone who has plenty, but also making sure that they're helping those in need at the same time. The idea of trying to read the arrow of causality backwards from somebody's current status to somehow reveal the content of their heart and their soul and their actions is absolutely opposed by all parts of our tradition. That particular idea also gets misunderstood within the Jewish context most commonly when people read the second paragraph of the Shema, where it talks about the benefits to the society, the benefits that come from following God's rules, as well as what happens if we don't. But again, if you look at the Hebrew, which doesn't translate into English easily, it is all in the collective second person plural, the you all rather than you individually. More questions? Floor is open.
I had another question.
Sorry, just one. I got a YouTube question. The prosperity theology is really going to have a reality check in about a month. Let's pray Hashem helps us and we know him more and more. So Michelle is pointing out that prosperity theology works great as long as you're prospering. When you're not prospering, it can be devastating to a person's conception of their relationship with God, that somehow they must have angered God because the stock market has crashed. And indeed, there are going to be many people who are wondering, what did I do wrong during this next month, when it's not what did they do wrong, but what have we as a global community done, and how have we been inadequate in responding to the needs of the world, not only at this moment, but in building up our resources to be able to deal with these types of issues. But Kali, you said you had another question?
Yeah, I wanted to know what exactly is an afikomen and what's the purpose behind it?
What exactly is an afikomen? The afikomen is the middle matzah, the broken half of the middle matzah, the larger of the two halves, that is then set aside for the end of the meal during the Seder. It is most likely derived from a Greek word. There's a lot of debate of exactly the origin of how it came to be, but the explanation that has seemed most plausible to me was that in the Greek time, you would have these same kinds of symposiums, these party meals where you would gather and people would debate and discuss very lofty ideals within their society, and they would also drink a lot, and they would also gorge themselves. And when the party was over, you would get up and you'd go to the next party. It's kind of like a pub crawl with higher conversation. And that was a known behavior among the Greco-Roman communities. And what Judaism did was they adapted that model and said, look, yes, you know what? Sitting around, lounging, drinking, eating in joy, and talking about the Exodus, this is a very good idea. We should add that layer and layer of intellectualism to this experience. But when we're done, we're done. We're not moving on to the next party, because it's not the party that's important. It is the insights, the spirituality that we gain from it, that is what's most important. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this second piece, which represented the diminishment we had at the beginning of the Seder, and that's going to be our dessert, right? We're not going off for sweetmeats, and we're not going off for cakes, and we're not going out for other drinks. We are going to finish with where we started, this bread of affliction. And so it creates I'm trying to line up at the camera, a bookend where we start with matzah, and the final flavor in our mouth from our food is matzah, to make sure that we have the right framing, the right context for this experience. Many communities have developed different customs and traditions around this. Because the afikomen needs to be the last thing that you have, it is a very important piece of the service. So what you do is you'll find in some communities, the leader of the Seder will hide the afikomen, and then the children will find it, because without it, we can't continue. This is another way of keeping the kids' attention on the Seder, because they're watching the adults like a hawk to see where the afikomen is disappearing. In other communities, the roles are reversed. The children will try to kidnap the afikomen from the leader, and then they will try to ransom it back for some sort of prize from the adults, so that the service can continue. I don't know if that actually made anything clearer, but at least you'll understand what's going on around the table.
Just don't hide it
Interesting.
in
Thank
the
you.
air duct.
Yes, as my mother, who's listening, reminds me, there was the one year that she hid it behind the vent in the floor heating duct, in order to really, give us a run for our money. I think in our house, we're going on how many years now with Hannah being the finder? It's like at least 10 years where she has uninterruptedly been the one who found the afikomen. She is very, very good at figuring this out. Maybe this year Nathaniel will win. Other questions? This is your time, guys. It can be about Passover, it can be about anything else. If it's too big, I'll be happy to tell you that that's coming up in a later episode. But don't be afraid to ask. Because if you don't ask, then we'll be wrapping it up. A reminder that you can always email me. You can always Zoom with me if we can set up a time one-on-one. We can do text messages, phone calls, all the normal modes of communication. But I did want to give this one chance because usually when people have questions, they're questions that everyone else is also interested in. But if no one else has any questions tonight, going once, going twice, 3 times. All right, then we will call it for here. Obviously, we will not be having our class next week or the following week because of Passover. It is the second night of Passover, and then it is the last night of Passover for the next 2 Thursdays. And that means I won't be using the Zoom. So please have a wonderful Passover and have a great time with either your families, with yourself, with your friends, whoever it is you are with, whoever it is you wish to be with but can't be with. Do try and savor this experience. This is, God willing, a once-in-a-lifetime Seder that you will look back on and remember the emotions that you have at this time, the experience that you have at this time, and perhaps understand a little bit better what it is like to celebrate a holiday that celebrates freedom when you're not 100% free. And that hopefully will be an emotion that will bring you to a different spiritual place than if it had been uneventful, but also hopefully one that we will not have to repeat in anyone's lifetime. So have a wonderful and great Pesach, and of course, Shabbat Shalom, which is Shabbat is just around the corner. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to contact me anytime, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Take care, everyone, and be safe.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.